We're now more than 2 months into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and obviously there's been a lot of devastation, basically all of it occurring within the geographic boundaries of Ukraine. But for some time, there's been an indication that perhaps it's moved across the border and into Russian territory. And most recently, there is some greater evidence that that might be happening. Now, to be clear, the Ukrainian leaders are not confirming or denying that some of these attacks, whether via shelling or missile strikes that are purported to be happening in Russian territory, have actually happened. They're not confirming, they're not denying. But they have apparently a senior advisor apparently described what was going on as karma, which is an odd way to put it. But anyway, it appears the Ukrainian troops are hitting the infrastructure, military targets, and potentially villages inside of Russia, which, like some of this again might be against military installations. For all of us who have feared civilians being caught in the crossfire or intentionally targeted inside of Ukraine, there's fears that potentially Russian civilians could die in these strikes in Russian territory as well. And the numbers apparently are going up. At least 11 different attacks seem to have occurred since the beginning of the Russian invasion, and it's accelerating in the course of just the last week. There are also these suspicious explosions that have been happening in Russian military facilities near the border. You can see in this map, it's a pretty wide variety of different targets, mostly quite close to the Ukrainian border, but some significantly further in, making it a little bit hard to imagine that these are direct strikes, that it could be accidents that are being sort of conceptualized as being part of this, but might be truly separate. It might be sabotage going on. But it's difficult to know exactly what to make of all this. We do know that there was an apparent attack at a fuel depot some time ago within the last few weeks. Let us show you that footage in case you've forgotten what this was like.
Friday at first light, just beyond Ukraine's northern border with Russia, firefighters tackling a blaze at a fuel depot in the Russian city of Belgorod. The governor there has accused Ukraine of sending helicopters to attack the oil storage tanks under the cover of darkness. Security camera and other footage on social media seems to confirm some kind of attack by helicopters and the firing of missiles. If the Russian claims are true, this will be the first attack by Ukrainian forces on Russian soil since the war began. Ukraine's foreign minister said he could neither confirm nor deny responsibility, but the Kremlin says the suspected airstrike doesn't help the prospect of ongoing peace talks.
Now, of course, that was several weeks ago. And it's certainly, like when you think back to the beginning of the invasion, the Russians felt fairly certain, and it seemed plausible that they would establish almost instantaneous air superiority over the entirety of Ukraine. When they're flying helicopters, at least somewhat deep in your own territory, that's about as far from air superiority as we can imagine. The most recent attacks, of course, don't appear to have been done via helicopters. We also know that the US has sent over a lot of military equipment, including howitzers, that in theory could be used in these sorts of attacks outside of Ukraine's territory. And we know that Russia's been becoming increasingly frustrated with the aid that's being provided. If those weapons are implicated in attacks inside of Russia, one can imagine that they would be even more furious.
Yeah, so this has got really mixed news. So first of all, karma, I agree with it. There was a propagandist reporter on the scene in when some of apparently the bombs were dropping, and she was in a panic. And she's like, oh my God, this is totally unexpected. I can't believe this is happening. Why can't you believe it's happening? You invaded them, you started a war with them. Why wouldn't they have a right to attack you back? But that's the thing with bullies. Like they always love to punch you, and they've punched Ukraine now thousands of times, killed endless number of people. The minute you punch them a little bit back, they're like, oh my God, this is not fair. This is what the hell, they're killing Russians. Yeah, you're murdering Ukrainians every single day. What part of that is hard to understand? So like the Russian shock and disbelief, can you believe the Ukrainians are fighting back? Yeah, I could definitely believe it. That's what I would do. Now, having said that, we have to be extraordinarily careful here, or in this case, the Ukrainians have to be extraordinarily careful. The reason is, It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. I think the Ukrainians are right. If my country was invaded, I wouldn't care anything about etiquette. I wouldn't care, would I attack back? Of course I would, right? And I wouldn't care about, oh my God, they hit a fuel depot. Goddamn right we did. Those are the weapons you're bringing in. That's the fuel you're bringing in to invade and murder my citizens. I've got no qualms about that on a moral level. The reason we have to be careful is inside the country, they only have state-controlled media. And they've already stoked them up to be super angry and pretended the Ukrainians are the aggressors and the Nazis and all this stuff. And unfortunately, the Russian people believe it. It's the only thing they're seeing. So now when they see this, it's gonna be so easy to say to them, can you believe it? The Nazis are almost here. Now for us, that sounds insane, absurd, because we know it's not anywhere near true. But the Russian people don't know that. And if you want a good example of how you could have mass delusion in a country, we had it right here. 7 out of 10 Americans thought that Saddam Hussein had attacked us personally on 9/11. Why? Our media brainwashed our citizens into thinking that Iraq attacked us when it had not attacked us at all. That's why 7 out of 10 Americans were totally misled by our mainstream media. Now, what do you think is happening with state-controlled media? Now, our mainstream media is a little bit more sophisticated in how they do propaganda, right? But at the end of the day, 70%, 70%, and in Russia, it's a little bit higher than 70% right now. So now you got folks talking about, oh, we should strike back with nukes. So we're getting into super dangerous territory now.
Yeah, and just on the attacks themselves, one, they seem to be strategic attacks. These are not the same types of attacks that we saw in Bucha in Ukraine, indiscriminate killing of unarmed civilians, mass rape, those kinds of things. This seems to be a strategic attack, if in fact it was Ukraine backed by the United States and others, which I would be surprised if they claim control over this. Like take responsibility over this, because you can see why they would want to. Yes, that was us, Zelensky saying, absolutely, we did it and you better expect more. But also, you gotta wonder, Putin obviously has a million screws loose and nobody knows what he's gonna do next. So why would you wanna take responsibility for it if you know maybe they're going to escalate to the next level? So far, there doesn't seem to be intelligence to say that they're going to mobilize any nukes, but who knows? So yeah, I keep on thinking about the fact that Cenk is absolutely right. This is a neighboring country. What Russia helped Assad do in Syria was not a neighboring country. The backlash to that was not the death of Russians, was not attacks on Russian soil. Now that it is, imagine if the United States invaded Mexico and suddenly there was a skirmish on that border. We would freak out. But of course, when it happens in the Middle East or it happens in Afghanistan, that's over there.
Yeah, I just want to say one quick thing about that, because Franny's exactly right. In Iraq, we attacked Iraq with no justification. They had no weapons of mass destruction, and they had not attacked us on 9/11. They were actually an enemy of Al Qaeda. So if did Iraq have every right to attack us back? Yes, but if they had, I don't know if we would have nuked them, but it's certainly possible. And we would have then attacked Iran and Syria and Jordan and every other country there is, because Americans would have been in a rage. How dare they fight back? I get, you know it, every one of you knows it if you're on the left or the right. If after we attacked Iraq, Saddam Hussein had somehow hit an American city and killed hundreds of people, oh, we would have murdered everybody in Iraq. We almost murdered everybody in Iraq as it was, right? And so don't be surprised if the Russians do likewise. That's why we're in super dangerous territory.
Yeah, and there's a ton of considerations. Assuming that this is the Ukrainians, assuming that we're going to see more of this, they do need to be very careful, because of course there are strategic reasons why you would want to be conducting these attacks. First of all, logistically, there's the preparation of the Russian forces. They are being supplied from some of these facilities. Weapons are being stored there. You'd want to attack them where, as of right now, at least they're not being as well defended. At the same time though, if they start killing a significant number of civilians, or if Russian media can make it look like they're killing a significant number of civilians, then that not only is morally and ethically wrong, but it also would very, I think, quickly work to undercut the position of moral superiority that the Ukrainians have in this conflict. They have been widely accepted by the vast majority of the world as the victims in this. It would then start to muddy the waters a little bit on that.
But only inside of Russia, in my opinion.
I
think the one thing that Ukraine has going for it that Syria sadly did not was that the misinformation worked so well in that war, whereas in this war, that misinformation can only sort of really work on the Russian people inside the country. Whereas we just heard Putin this week say, like, I didn't expect people to support Ukraine. Like, actually, some of us didn't either, given how we support a lot of countries that are under attack. But anyway,
yeah, and some Fox hosts are still trying to figure out exactly how to message around that. And there's strategic concerns too. Ukraine is receiving a good number of weapons and the training to use them, but they also have a significant number of Russian soldiers in their own territory. Cities are besieged right now. Can they necessarily afford to be conducting all of these strikes hundreds, thousands of miles away? Not necessarily, but at the same time, the Russians right now are able to send the vast majority of their forces in without worrying about strikes against their back lines, forcing them to spread out their defenses a little bit, especially in terms of air defenses. That could be valuable for the Ukrainians. So there's a lot of, I think, moral communication as well as strategic concerns. But in terms of the reaction of right-wingers, there was one quote that I definitely wanted to read. This is coming from the editor of Russia Today, Margarita Simonyan, who tweeted it just yesterday. And she tweeted, "The Anglo-Saxons publicly recommend that Ukraine move hostilities onto Russian territory and supply it with the means to implement this plan. What choice are you giving us, idiots? Complete destruction of the remaining Ukraine? Nuclear strike?" First of all, what Anglo-Saxons are saying that is where the fight should be, and that's great. But anyway, this is the same woman who was joking around, chuckling about nuclear strikes against New York City just a couple of days ago, the editor of Russia Today. She thinks it's hilarious. By the way, if nuclear apocalypse happened, they were joking that, well, at least we'd all get to go to heaven. So that's good. I would also say you need to expand your thought process there. What alternatives do we have? The complete destruction of Ukraine, nuclear strike. How about withdrawing? How about that? How about you end the war that you all started that doesn't need to continue for a minute longer than you choose to continue it? How about that?
Yeah, look guys, I'm so conflicted on it because I know that if my country was attacked and civilians were killed, family members were killed, I'd see red and I wouldn't give a damn who we're bombing in Russia. Oh, Crimea River, oh, have you been bombed? Oh, I should care. When I'm bombed, you shouldn't care. But when you're bombed, I should care? No deal at all. Now, that's how I would feel emotionally, but yes, of course, John is right that Ukrainians have to be very, very careful about hitting military targets and not civilian targets, because hitting Russian civilians doesn't make you any better, okay? And that is a war crime and you shouldn't do it. And all it's gonna do is unfortunately unleash propagandists like the one that John quoted, who's gonna then say, kill all the Ukrainians. And that's not gonna help anybody. Now, the last part of it is, guys, we keep assuming that when the Russians saying that they're considering using nukes, Putin has hinted at it several times. His paid propagandists on TV, which he clearly speaks to, have now threatened it multiple times. And we keep assuming, oh, well, they're not really gonna do that. We also thought they wouldn't really invade Ukraine. So I think we're underestimating the threat of nuclear holocaust. And that is where we are.
Strangely, US intelligence was right about this war.
Yeah.
Maybe the last thing they've been right about was the war.
Maybe the first.
Maybe the first. The last thing in a while. I don't know. When were they ever right? But anyway, so if they're not sounding the alarms, I'm a little bit like heartened, I guess.
But you know what? They might not be sounding the alarms because they don't want people to panic and make the situation worse.
Sure.
So you look,
Trump's playbook.
No one who's watched TYT in the last 20 years thinks we're soft on US intelligence. They've bungled things endlessly, they're liars, on, and we've called out their propaganda before and more thoroughly than anyone has. But they got Ukraine right in the beginning. They said that they a number of things we were skeptical about, and it turns out they were correct. So we do a news program, we report facts. Now, that's an interesting data point that they have not sounded any alarms on the nukes, but if they were concerned about the nukes and I was them, I wouldn't sound any alarms either. I'm pretty sure that would make it worse. So, and guys, yeah, okay, we could all worry, but at the same time, I love giving constructive solutions. And there really isn't one here. I mean, you can't be like, oh, the Russians are threatening nuclear war, so let's just let them take any country they like. No, you can't do that. On the other hand, we have to be measured in how we fight back. We don't have a choice. Because he is crazy. I mean, he believes this Russian philosopher that's just absolutely nuts and thinks that progress is bad and that we should go back to the medieval ages. That is literally his Dugin's philosophy, and his two biggest fans are Vladimir Putin and Steve Bannon. And I'm not at all joking. By the way, third guy who might be a huge fan is Tucker Carlson. So that's the insane world we live in today.
Super final question in terms of how we respond. I mean, one area where we could respond that they've been asking us to, the Russians, is stop sending weapons. And so obviously we've been watching and critiquing every step along the way from before the conflict. What signals is Biden sending? What are they saying? And more importantly, what are they doing? And so we've evaluated now several rounds of aid, either direct economic aid or weapons shipments. Recently, as I said, there were armored vehicles, helicopters, long-range artillery. I was reading that Biden is apparently considering invoking the Defense Production Act to produce more javelins because we are sending more than can be produced. Russia is saying you can't do that. They're considering that basically us declaring war on Russia. And especially if some of those weapons were being used outside of the context of Ukraine, do you start to worry that they either might have a point or might at least convince themselves that they have a point and respond accordingly?
Look, these are super hard questions. Number one, you've got to get actual media inside Russia, and I don't know how in the world you do that, because you need the Russian people to turn against Putin, and they're not going to do that if they think the Nazis are invading and are going to, kill all the Russians. I mean, that sounds absurd to us, but yeah, about 90% of Russia actually believes that Putin is defending them against imminent invasion by Nazis, right? And they think it's back to World War II and their only protector is Vladimir Putin. If we can't get them any real information, well, then if he's got the support of 80, 90% of Russians, he's not gonna turn around. And if he loses face, that is devastating to him. So there are no good answers here. Either you concede to him, but then if you concede to him, not only does he take Ukraine, which is a massive, massive, unbearable injustice, but then he's got no reason not to take the next country and the one after that, because you've already conceded to him. You cannot do that. On the other hand, if you beat him, look, and the Ukrainians look like they're halfway towards beating him, in terms of getting him at least to retreat to the eastern part of Ukraine, well, then you've cornered a madman. And he keeps telling you he's gonna use nukes. I don't know, obviously you've gotta hope against all hope that it's not against all hope. I mean, he likely won't do it, right? I don't want you to panic. But there is some percentage chance now. There is some percentage chance, and you've gotta hope he doesn't push the button. Because if he does, we will, and we'll all be dead.
Yeah, I mean, final thoughts. I just feel like this begins so much, the timeline is so much longer than just this war, on all of the steps that the United States could have implemented in terms of diplomacy, ways that they could have taken Putin more seriously during all kinds of invasions, Crimea being one of them, and like the real sanctions, not just sort of the ones, like how many rounds of sanctions? Why weren't we doing this before? So like it's very hard for me now to be like, to know exactly what to do because we got ourselves into this mess in some ways. And I do think that we should be supporting the Ukrainian government with weapons. I'm glad there's a government to support, and it happens to be one that isn't, I don't know, murdering journalists, unlike other governments we tend to support, or rebels that we just sort of willy-nilly, like Libya, just give them everything, don't know what happens. Oh, it's just gonna sort of decay into different like warlords type. Like we don't want that, obviously. So like, what's the plan then to bring them back? I think is also another question when this ends.
Super duper last thing. Look, I think the best strategy is the one that Biden is actually doing. That's why I've given him credit on this. Putting pressure on the oligarchs. because those are the only people who can have any prayer of overruling Putin, however they do it. And so they seize the yachts and you think, what's the big deal? But remember, they think those yachts are their penises. So you took that away from them and the oligarchs were super mad. And now we're selling them off. And they're like, wait, I thought you were just seizing them. You're gonna sell them, but that way, no, I spent $150 million on that yacht. And so, and then there's a couple other financial things that we've done recently where you could tell we're turning the vice on the oligarchs, and you could tell from the squeals of Putin. Every time we do some sort of economic sanction that hits the oligarchs, you hear Putin squeal and then say, oh, I have nukes, don't you dare take one more yacht, okay? Because what do rich, powerful people care about? Themselves, period.
Yeah.
So you have to hurt those oligarchs to a maximum degree until they say to Putin, we're done with this, however they say it. That's our best hope.